Hello, 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 live from Denver. It is Friday night. Let's make sure, there we are. Okay, good. Just making sure the sound check is all working as usual. Thank you for appearing here live tonight. Apparently there are other things going on other channels, which just coincidentally happen to be at the same time that my show is on. So thank you for joining me here. We have some things to go over. As you can see, I am not joined this week by my beautiful wife, Melissa. She is feeling a little, not so camera ready tonight. So she is taking the night off, and that is perfectly fine. I have some things prepared to go over with you guys, but I figured we would kind of get going on the usual beginning of show stuff. Now, stupidly, though, I did not get my my quote of the week from her. However, I'm going to text her and I'm going to ask her if she has a quote of the week for us. And when that comes through, we will save that or share that. I will share that with you guys. I should have prepped that beforehand. I was distracted with some other things. Okay. Yeah, I know. I'm missing her too. Oh, thank you, John, for letting me know that. Yeah, I guess I want to coordinate with you on that other matter we have to talk about. That'll be great. Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and what a week, huh? I mean, kind of a sort of a not really much happening kind of week. Tony and I will, of course, go over the stories he posted on Monday when we post the after Scientology show. I did an interview this week with another interview recorded with Mitch Brisker, the former director from Scientology, who's been featured so prominent on everybody's shows these days. And good on him, because he's got a lot of story to tell from a lot of years, more years than even I was in Scientology. That guy was in for a long time and worked directly under Miscavige. So he's got all kinds of interesting perspectives to provide. Some of what we're going to talk about today comes from conversations I've had with him by email. I'm going to read you a little bit of that. But we had a really interesting talk, and I'm telling you about this even though this is not the podcast that's posting tomorrow. This conversation I did with Mitch this week is actually going to probably post in about 2 or 3 weeks. We'll see, maybe next week, but probably a week after. And it's all about, I'm going to tell you guys, because I'm in no real, I don't think I'm going to get scooped by anybody on this, because there is an absolute absence, and I mean there's nothing out there on the Scientology confidential films. And I'm not talking about the training films that they use to make auditors. We've talked about those at length. People have laughed about it, told jokes about it, described it. I've talked with Mitch about it. But what's never been talked about anywhere by anybody are the OT films. And it's not, and we had a good chunky talk about that and a lot of other stuff. And I think you guys are going to find it absolutely fascinating. I sure did, because as a Scientologist, I didn't make it onto the OT levels, so I never got to see these films, and they are highly confidential. These are the OT films. These are films that actually have OT information in them. They're not shown to every Scientologist. They're not shown around. You have to be on the OT levels to even see these films or know about them even, right? They're promoted as there are these, really amazing films you get to see, but they don't tell you too much about them, even in Scientology. But outside of Scientology, nobody's ever mentioned these things, not one word. And I've Googled and Googled looking for this, and I can't find much of anything on it. So I was really excited to talk to Mitch about this, and I think it's going to be an interesting podcast for you guys because of that. Okay, wow, Kiwiland, excellent. Excellent. Okay, well, like I said, I really appreciate you guys showing up here tonight for the show. Nope, Mel says she does not have one. All right, well, that's fine. No quote of the week from Mel, but we do have Benson Cam, and I will, here it is, our Snuggles Not Struggles Cam to begin the show. This is our dog Benson, and we do love him so. This is him hanging out in his usual throne position in the living room. This is right on top of the couch there, as you can see. There are our curtains and our front windows right there, and it's a nice sunny day still here in Denver right now. This was just taken within like the last hour. And there he is. And it's funny because I was right there looking at him while I was shooting this, and he looks a little like he's just kind of bored or sad there. But in real life, that's not actually how he looks. It's a weird thing with the camera. I was watching this when I was putting it up here for this, and I was like, oh, it doesn't quite totally capture every bit of emotion or life that he's showing there. It's hard to explain, but it's just it was interesting to me when I was looking at the video afterwards. But he does love that spot. That is his number one spot right there. There it is, the big yawn, and we are done with that. So that's our Snuggles Not Struggles cam for this week. I just can't say enough good things about our little pooch. He's awesome. Okay, so why don't we talk about some culty stuff? Let's get around to that. Okay, so yeah, Mitch did the OT films. Yeah, he redid them. He restored them, and it was a big, long project. He had a few things to say about it. So cults of personality, Scientology's cults of personality. So I was thinking of a bunch of examples of cults of personality today coming out of Scientology. And it was very interesting that just this afternoon, as I was thinking on this topic, Mitch and I exchanged some emails, and he let me know something that totally was like, oh, of course. And that led to another, of course, and then a kind of I could have had a V8 moment. One of those like real epiphany moments for me as somebody who studies this stuff and thinks about it, like what makes a cult, how does a cult leader become a cult leader? And for all of you who may not know, Netflix today is premiering a new documentary series called How to Become a Cult Leader, which is modeled after the How to Become a Tyrant series that they did. Peter Dinklage is even narrating this one like he did the first one. And this is a very basic level look, with some good details at the steps you take in order to first become a tyrant, or in this series, become a cult leader. And I have only seen glimpses of this and that. I have to admit I'm a little, because I was going to try to make a documentary exactly like this, but they beat me to it, which is obviously totally fine. They had the money and resources to do it. And it was such an obvious follow-up to the How to Become a Tyrant series. I was like, well, it's the perfect next thing to do as a cult leader. And that's exactly what they did, which is perfect. So I'm sure it's going to be awesome to see. And this is the kind of thing, like I said, that I think about all the time and am reading and studying about and talking and interviewing people about is cults, cult leaders, and what makes them. Scientology is a great example of this, but for a lot of reasons. And so there's a lot of, examples we can find in the Scientology world. And cults of personality are sort of a different thing from what we talk about with destructive cults, where it's more of a hierarchical, formalized power dynamic situation, which the cult leader is absolutely taking advantage of. There's like things going on in a cult follower codependent relationship that are just abusive in a way, both ways, but that takes a very objective point of view to see that. Most cult leaders are just abusing the hell out of their power is what's going on. And it's really bad, right? Cults of personality can build up around a person, and they're not necessarily abusive or destructive. They're just very dedicated followers, worshipers. The whole concept of influencers has everything to do with this. This is what cults of personality are all about, is here's this one individual who doesn't particularly have any special skill or ability that puts them, above other human beings, and yet something about them appeals to a group of people, whether it's their knowledge, whether it's their looks, whether it's some skill or ability they have, whether it's something they know about. I mean, this kind of thing, right, is what sets people up and apart. Then people want to look at, admire, follow, listen to, be influenced by this person. But there isn't necessarily anything abusive going on. It's a willing, knowing relationship. There's no underhandedness, at least not necessarily at first. This can be developed into an actual full-on destructive cult, and some celebrities and some other people who find themselves in this position of having a cult of personality turn it into a destructive cult. You know, as according to the whole anatomy of all the things we talk about with destructive cults of black and white thinking, us versus them, you know, central core truths or sacred truths that suddenly become only true within this group. That's their mutual, assured, agreed upon reality. That's when you're getting into destructive cult territory where it's truth and reality itself is being altered and skewed, and usually there's a disciplinary force involved. There's confession that gets involved. You know, a lot of really nasty stuff comes into play very quickly when a cult leader becomes a cult leader, right? When they take it over to the dark side. Scientology is obviously an example of this. And one of the things that I got to talking to Mitch about today that made me go, what? Was one of these sort of cults of personality things that are also cults, destructive cult things. This is something that you'll see happen in both of these places, both of these circumstances. Oh, God, Elon Musk absolutely has a cult of personality built up around him. In fact, I was going to use him as an example later. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so... yeah, absolutely, Anthony. There are people, for example, Tom Petty, definitely had a cult of personality built up around him. He hated it, never wanted to go out of his house because of it. He didn't want to have anything to do with all of that crap, right? He didn't want to be a celebrity, didn't want to have that status. There are actors and other celebrities who never wanted that status. They literally were just trying to do the work. And they do the work well, and it's public-facing work, and so people start getting very interested in them personally and start following them around, start going through their trash. I mean, people get really crazy about celebrities, and this can be very disturbing for somebody who never wanted, never asked for any of that. They get a fan base, and some of those fans can be on the extreme end of fandom, you know, and remember, fan is short for fanatic. So that does happen. Absolutely. Cults of personality can build up because of a popular base or movement that has nothing to do with what the cult leader or central figure is trying to do. But in order for it to be sustained, in order for it to grow, in order for it to flourish, in order for that codependent relationship to form, the central figure in a cult of personality has to become an active participant. That part doesn't happen by accident. Okay, you can put it off for a while and grow a fan base, but you know, once you start interacting and doing the celebrity thing and engaging in celebrity media and getting into that world, or as a business person even, you get into the business world. I mean, there's, this applies beyond celebrities. But once these things start happening where the interchange and the communication and they have personal moments with you and all that kind of thing, that's when it starts becoming a little bit more deeper. And if that person then realizes that they have a base of people that they can actually motivate to move and do and influence events, and they can make their little army of people do things, then they realize that they have actual power as a leader figure. And that's when they move even more closer to that destructive cult model where they might start influencing people in ways that aren't necessarily good for them. Okay. Maybe Stan Lee's an example of that, not sure. Yes, there are independent Scientologists that have become a cult of personality within their own little world. Remember, cults can be two people. It doesn't have to be big. It's the nature of the relationship and the nature of the activity that goes on that determines whether you're dealing with a destructive cult or not the size of it. So yes, absolutely. I would say that there are probably a couple, you know. Okay, so, there is that. Cult of personality around a thing or product is not the same thing. That's fandom. That's when we're talking about a cult of personality, we're talking about a human being in the middle of that. We can use it figuratively to describe other things, but that's not what we're talking about. A marriage can absolutely be a destructive. It's a domestic situation then, right? And we talk about coercive control in domestic situations. In fact, the term coercive control was popularized by a guy named Evan Stark in the domestic violence realm or domain. That's where if you Google coercive control, almost everything you're going to find is going to have to do with domestic violence situations. And those could be called a cult of one or a family level cult, because it can obviously influence all the children as well. If there's an abusive father or mother figure running a little cult of, it wouldn't just be a cult of personality. It would be like a full-blown destructive cult. And this is, for example, the kind of thing that the Duggars got involved in, that Bill Gothard taught them how to do, that Mike and Debbie Pearl taught them how to do. We all saw that in Shiny Happy People, or you might have seen that on my channel. Okay, so cults of personality, right? So they can become something horrible. Now, one of the ways that you build up a personality is rumors, is stories, is anecdotes. There's a sort of almost a mysticism that can, this sort of mythical lore that can be built up around an individual. And the crazy thing about it is it can last. Those stories have longevity because of the way that they get passed down and around. And in Scientology, Scientology is no stranger to this. L. Ron Hubbard and David Miscavige especially, when I was in Scientology and in the Sea Org, we would hear these stories. We would hear these anecdotes from people we trusted, people we knew, people who we thought would know or would have heard from somebody who knew. And we were sure these things were true. And so much so that I had so many anecdotes about so many things about L. Ron Hubbard and David Miscavige when I was in Scientology that were not based on anything I ever read anywhere. It was stories. And I was so sure those things were true that even years after getting out of Scientology, I was arguing with John Atack about some of these things. And other people, and because we're so sure that these things are true, only because we have heard them, or heard about them, or somebody related it to us, or maybe we saw some clip or photograph, and then it was interpreted for us as to this is what happened in that photograph, or whatever. Right? Very rarely is there like direct firsthand evidence of these things. It's usually that, and that's the whole point. That's the way they spread. Davy Crockett, that's right. There's also George Washington with the hatchet, right, with the axe. I cannot tell a lie. All that, we heard that crap in school. Cults of personality build up around people, and there are consequences to this, which we'll get to. Now, one of the things that I was going to share with you guys today is this little anecdote from Scientology, from and about David Miscavige and Tom Cruise, where this was when I was on the RPF and I was up in the mill, and Mitch reminded me of this because he has been talking with me about the CCHR Museum of Death, the Industry of Death Museum, that whole exhibit. He's the one who was the creative director who put that all together, designed it, worked it out, and that was amazing to me. I was somebody who on the RPF built furniture for that museum, for that whole display, and watched other people design and build the displays that ended up being put there. They built little model mock-ups of them first, and then they would go build the full-size thing. And so we watched them do this while we were doing our RPF work in the mill, making furniture for the organizations, usually is what we were doing. Desks and chairs and stuff like that. The entire renovation of ASHO and AOLA, for example, all the woodwork and metalwork and everything that got done, yeah, most of that was us. So we would do that kind of work on the RPF all the time. And so when CCHR was hot and heavy, and that was the project that everybody was working on, we were working on it too. And one of the things that we heard was a story about Tom Cruise and David Miscavige, where Miscavige somehow was in a room with Cruise and was talking about the CCHR museum and how it was behind schedule. And the way the story got told is, and Cruise said, outraged, couldn't believe, what? They're behind schedule building some sets? What? What are you guys doing all day? What are you guys at Gold and Sea Org? How could they possibly be behind schedule? This is all supposedly what Tom Cruise said to David Miscavige. I got set production guys I can call up right now. We could have those displays built in 2 or 3 days. This was the story as relayed to me as an RPFer from a crew member who I believed, because I believed he was on the line of people who would have heard about something like this. And this was in his bailiwick. This didn't have to do with legal or some PR thing. This was Tom Cruise, David Miscavige building the project we're working on, right? Their attention is on it. It's a big deal. And Tom Cruise is outraged that we're falling behind as Sea Org members. And this is what's communicated. And David Miscavige, of course, was like, no, Tom, don't worry about it. Of course we're going to handle it. And, and so here's this professional attitude being communicated down to us about how we need to, we're so lame, we can't even beat some Hollywood set designers. What kind of fools and ignoramuses are we? Well, and this, of course, motivated us because we believed that this actually happened. Now, of course, you'll see where I'm going with this, but, oh, God, yeah, you'll hear stories about all kinds of people. Now, and this is kind of my point today, is all kinds of stories about all kinds of people that you've heard. Well, these were the kind of stories, or some of the kind of stories, we would hear about with David Miscavige and Scientology and Tom Cruise and their relationship. This was the internal rumor line of Scientology. And there were other stories. There were, we've shared one, which I'll bring up again here because it fits right in with this. David Miscavige was infamously known for being able to locate outnesses or problem areas or issues in rooms or areas he had never been in or had only just gone in that he didn't work in and didn't know anything about. On inspections, he would do inspections maybe once or twice every couple years. I mean, this was not a routine scheduled thing. If Miscavige was coming to town and he wanted to come around, well, who was going to stop him, right? And so we would hear within a couple days advance, usually notice. We would sometimes not, but most of the time we knew he was coming. We would stay up for 2 or 3 days cleaning the entire base, top to bottom, white gloving everything, getting everything ready, because if Miscavige came through your area, the last thing you wanted was for him to see some dust or grime or some obvious problem that you should be dealing with, including your very full in-basket of stuff. It's not just physically does it look good. You don't just shove everything in a drawer. That's not going to fly, because when they come do inspections, they'll open your drawers. Case in point, David Miscavige would come by and he would go into and we'd hear about this within hours of it happening. David Miscavige would go do an inspection of the Captain Ash O'Day's office, and he'd walk in there with his entourage. And he has people following him, writing down every order, every word he says. He's got people with tape recorders recording everything he's saying. I mean, it's ridiculous. And he would walk into the captain's office as though he had never been there, look around and go, something's not right in here. And he would walk over to the desk and go, And he'd open up a drawer, and there would be some dispatch or some piece of bullshit, right, that the captain was trying to hide or didn't want known about, or was going to be an issue, and it was in his desk drawer, and David Miscavige just happened to go right to it and find it. And we would hear about this. And we're Scientologists, we're Sea Org members. We think David Miscavige is the king of the crop, right? The cock of the walk, the guy who knows. He's obviously OT8. He's obviously OT 20,000. He's obviously the successor of L. Ron Hubbard. He's obviously the smartest guy in the room everywhere he goes. So we all think, of course he does that, right? He's OT. Oh, thank you, Tesseract, for that. Thank you very much. Thanks for gifting some memberships for me. I really appreciate that. So, Miscavige, right? And so we would actually really believe in the context of Scientology and spirituality and OT powers that David Miscavige had OT powers and he could do shit like that for real. And we didn't have a clue that the night before he had gone through those offices and found all that shit before, when nobody was around, in the middle of the night. Right? Mark Headley has told these stories, and I've lived through these stories, and they're real. This is true. This really happens. And David Miscavige really pulls this shit. it's parlor tricks level stupidity. I mean, it's so obvious. It's so obviously simple. But in that context, in that world, in that mindset, we believe it. We never doubt it. We don't go, what? How did he? We don't. We didn't do that. We really went, aw, there it is. There's that OT power, right? That's how that works in that world, in that context, in that mindset. And so imagine my surprise today when Mitch unloads on me after I tell him about this whole story with David Miscavige and Tom Cruise. I said, look, I was on the RPF. This is what happened. We're having some back and forth emails. I describe it all to him, and he says to me, no problem, Chris. Don't assume for a moment that Cruise actually offered to get his set production people to work on the museum. Now, I got to let you guys know, by the way, right now, is Mitch Brisker, he's actually started his own YouTube channel. So if y'all aren't checking that out and subscribe to that, I would go do so, because that would be probably worth your time. He's putting his own videos together now. Anyway, so he said, don't assume for a moment that Cruise actually offered to get his set production people to work on the museum. This was one of Miscavige's favorite ploys for humiliating staff members. Dave was like the little punk who threatened to have his big brother beat you up. And isn't that interesting? That years, up until hours ago, I believed this Tom Cruise, David Miscavige story. I thought it was absolutely true that Tom Cruise had personal knowledge that the CCHR Museum of Death, Industry of Death Museum exhibit had gone behind schedule. He had been frustrated with David Miscavige about this. They were both frustrated about it. Miscavige had told them all about it, and Cruise's reaction was, this is ridiculous. I could get Hollywood people to fix this faster, right? All a complete fiction, a useful fantasy that was made up and sent down the line. And why do I know it's a fantasy? Because the guy who actually did the work and was on the lines right under Miscavige, reporting to him on this entire project, didn't know a thing about that. It's like, nope, nope. Right? At that time, he was still in Miscavige's good graces. Mitch was not in bad sorts with Miscavige. And Miscavige wasn't giving him threatening communications, right? But this rumor line went down the Sea Org rumor lines. Mitch was not a Sea Org member. This is the stuff that came to me as a lowly little Sea Org member on the RPF, and other estates personnel and other crew heard this crap and believed it. Just like we believed Miscavige could find outnesses with his theta power. So, yeah, bending spoons with brainwaves. Yeah. So that was the kind of thing we thought was true, right? And this is all going somewhere, of course. Now, he also wrote here in the email another thing I want to remind you guys about, which goes to my next point on this. When Mike Rinder told the story of Miscavige, this is Mitch telling this, right? When Mike Rinder told the story of David Miscavige telling the people in the hole that Tom Cruise asked if David wanted him to come over and punch them out, that's a story that they told, because Miscavige had gone into the hole and told them that. Miscavige went in there and said, Tom Cruise wants to come in here and beat the shit out of you fucking slackers. And they, of course, believed it. Did Tom Cruise even know about the hole? Did he even know this was going on? How would we know? But more importantly, would he threaten to go beat up Sea Org members? Maybe, maybe not. But if we know that David Miscavige is a liar, and he lies all the time, and that one of his favorite ploys for humiliating staff members is to use Tom Cruise to front for him, Doesn't that present an interesting picture of how David Miscavige uses his power and authority to make up complete horse shit about his friend Tom that he knows or thinks he knows is never going to make it back to Tom Cruise? Nobody in the Sea Org is going to go rat out David Miscavige to Tom Cruise. Ever. But ex-members will. And Mike Rinder tells this story. And doesn't it kind of present an interesting point of view that maybe Tom Cruise didn't know anything about it, or didn't know that much about it, or didn't actually threaten violence, but David Miscavige used him and used his name to front for him? I just think that's fascinating. And it sounds so perfectly like what cult leaders do that it's actually easier for me to believe that. And keep Tom out of the criminal stuff. Keep his hands clean. Keep him keep him in his own bubble. Compartmentalization of information is, as demonstrated in the Oppenheimer movie, a key principle of security, of operational security in an organization, whether it's the military or a cult. And David Miscavige is very likely a master of compartmentalizing information and feeding information down those various compartments that he knows is going to stay in those compartments, or at least will until ex-members come and blab about it. And then if they do blab about it, are they even going to be believed? Or does every single interpretation of all of this information always have to go to somebody's favorite meme? You know, it's like the world is sometimes a little bit more complicated and a little bit more interesting than is made out. You know, it's not always as black and white. And I find that more interesting. I find the world and people more interesting as a result of recognizing that and thinking that way. And that's true for cults too, right? So if this is all true, and I think it is, then we have a display not only of how cult leaders like David Miscavige operate, but we know now even more so what a little lying prick that guy is, and how he knowingly uses that knowledge to manipulate all the people around him and the people way down levels below him. And this would be the tactic of a cult leader, whether in a destructive cult or in the cult of personality. You start rumors about yourself. You get stories going out there about yourself. You create those things, or your PR team generates them for you. Fictions, useful fantasies, useful fictions, rumors, right? This is how they spread. And because people are going to tell other people who are going to believe them and are going to contextualize it, and the telephone game applies, of course, sometimes the rumors will go worse and sometimes they'll go better. They'll travel all over, but the point is the person's name is being said over and over and over again, and here's a useful story about the person that gives them more mystique or gives them more status or influence with people. And they're just useful fictions. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, God damn, there's a whole nother level of manipulation and influence and control right there that we know about, because there are PR firms that are paid to do this. It's called reputation management. So why would we imagine cult leaders wouldn't be doing this all on their own? And that really anybody who's in a position of power and influence could understand as a useful tool and engage with it. But it's a tool that's probably got two sides. There's probably a double-edged sword on there, right? Where it can help you, but it can also hurt you. And we know about how, black PR and rumors and all that kind of thing can come back and bite you in the butt. But that's not the ones that are generated by you as the cult leader, right? The cult leader is generating the good stuff. Let's get stories out there that will either result in them fearing me, loving me, admiring me, in awe of me, right? We will put out anecdotes and stories, or thinking I'm a friendly person, a warm person, and a compassionate person, and watch how they take wings and watch how people develop them, because that's what people are going to do. And you know that people are going to do that, and you're okay with that because who's developing them? Your worshipers and followers. So are they making them worse? No, they're making them better. They're pumping them up even more with every retelling. And this is power. This is absolutely a tool in the tool set for manipulating large groups of people. Subtly, every now and again. You don't do this every day. No way. You can't overdo it. Right? You do it every now and again. You get stories, you get anecdotes out there. So that's a thing. Okay, that is absolutely a thing. And the mystique, right, created by them. Now, this goes even further when it gets over into the cult side. And this is in Scientology with L. Ron Hubbard. Absolutely, where they become a divine figure. They become an object of worship. The cult of personality graduates over into something kind of awful, where people become overly devoted, overly engaged with, or invested in another person. What develops from that and from the stories that get told there is what we call a hagiography. It's the religious biography. It's the biography of a religious figure as told by the religion. L. Ron Hubbard's hagiography, his life story, according to the Church of Scientology, is wall-to-wall fiction. There is almost no truth connected with almost any of it. You get pictures, so you know he was in certain places at certain times, and everything else is embellishment, hyperbole, or total lies. It's amazing what groups can get away with within themselves, telling themselves what they want to hear about key principal figures. David Miscavige has a hagiography within Scientology developing right now. It's all over his website, and soon there will be life stories and stories from him as a kid, if not already, circulating around within the world of Scientology. Just like there have been stories for decades, ever since Scientology started, about L. Ron Hubbard and how when he was 3 years old, he fell in a bucket of red paint because he was Martian or some shit, and how he always wanted to save the world, and he realized from a very young age that he needed to help mankind, and all of blah, 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 right? There's an entire story. It fills volumes of books. Dan Sherman was not idle in all of his years in Scientology as L. Ron Hubbard's biographer. He was a drunk, and he was a drug guy or whatever. He was off the rails. And he was overly wordy as hell, but he was not idle. He put together volumes of work on L. Ron Hubbard's life. All of it total bullshit. And this is the hagiography of L. Ron Hubbard, and it is believed within the world of Scientology. Do you think that Donald Trump doesn't have the same thing within his cult? Think about it. There are rumors, there are stories, there are anecdotes, there are life stories told within the groups, within the cults that develop around these cult leaders that never make it outside the cult until ex-members come out and tell you about it. Not too many of us talk about anecdotes about David Miscavige. This isn't a subject that gets talked about a lot, but it's right there in the open. It's one of the most talked about things in the group. But when you leave, you reject it all, and you don't, the last thing I want to do is talk about all the lies connected with L. Ron Hubbard. Unless I'm exposing them to people like you, I'm not having conversations about this stuff. But very few, YouTubers even get into this stuff, and it's really, really interesting because this is a key feature of these groups is that there are these fantasies woven into the cultural fabric of the group. And after a while, you could be down at the lowest levels and you'll hear stories like this. It filters all the way down. It usually takes a while, but it does. And the cult leaders couldn't be happier that this stuff is out there because they're the ones putting most of it out there. Yeah, and absolutely, within the world of Donald Trump, within the world of Elon Musk's followers, within the world of Bill Gates's followers. Undeniably, just irrefutably, there are these kinds of rumors and stories that get told, these mythical, legendary status kind of stories. Some accomplishment that their guy pulled off, something he did or said or started. Elon Musk, for many, many years, rode on the wave of people believing that he actually invented the Tesla automobile, that he invented PayPal, that he came up with these whole SpaceX systems, and he was a design engineer who literally designed rockets. That's who people thought Elon Musk was. There are people right now, as I'm saying this, who fervently believe all the things I just said, and none of them are true. He did not found or invent PayPal. He did not found or invent the Tesla car, and he did not do design engineering on rockets for SpaceX. Amongst many, many, many other things that are credited to him that he never had anything to do with. Where do these ideas and stories come from? Most people assume they come from fans or something like that. Often they come from the guy and his team, his inner circle. Premeditatively, purposefully, to manipulate the view of them, their reputation, and their ability to influence people through lies. It's an amazing thing, because the best thing about it, the thing that is like the seller, the convincer, is you're going to hear that story or rumor from someone you trust. Whether it's a media outlet, a friend, a family member, a newspaper, a newsletter you read, a blog you read, a tweet you read from some account you follow, you're gonna believe it because it's coming to you from somebody that you trust. And where do they get it? And where do they get it? And where do they get it? Right? These things are impossible to trace back and so hard to prove. And yet there it is, right there in the open, in front of everybody's eyes, right? It's hidden in plain sight. And you can get a lot of influence and power with a culture, on a cultural level. This is long-term kind of planning and thinking, but it works in spades when you have a dedicated following who can become even more fervent and more dedicated to you because they believe these bullshit stories about you. Yeah, it's powerful, powerful stuff. Okay, let me see if I had anything else there. No, that was actually it as far as that topic goes. So I thought I would open up the rest of the show here for if y'all had any questions or anything or wanted to call in. Now would be the time. 984-214-4154. I see we have a very small audience tonight, and I get it. And again, I'll just say that's just a real shame that that kind of thing has to happen. Cult of the Collective, awesome. Yeah, exactly. You guys are getting what I'm talking about here. Yeah, he did become the world's richest African American. That is true. That is very, very true. Just kind of looking back here at some of the comments tonight. All right, cool, guys. So, I don't know, you want to do some Q&A or something? I'm open for it. We got about 15 minutes. I will tell you that the podcast tomorrow is actually pretty cool. I've talked to you guys about how I want to go out further on coercive control and talk about how it influences domestic situations like I was talking about earlier today, or even therapeutic situations. What happens when you have a predatory therapist? And I'm talking full-blown predators, right? That's rough. That sucks. I mean, it's bad, and it's hard enough to find a good therapist these days, somebody you can actually connect with who isn't doing some kind of woo nonsense bullshit with you, but actually trying some scientific treatment modalities that are actually going to help you and deal with your trauma or deal with stress or deal with anxiety. That's hard enough to get that person. But then when you find somebody who looks and sounds exactly like what you're looking for, but actually and quickly turns the relationship into something awful and becomes a bit of a tyrant in your life. And it doesn't have to take a long time for that to happen. And I'm going to be talking, you'll see tomorrow, an interview I did with a woman who had that exact experience. Unfortunately, a couple times in her life, she ran into coercive situations, and we talk about that in some detail in the show. So you'll be seeing that tomorrow. All right. And let's see. What else do I have to talk? Oh, all right. Since we have the time, and I did actually want to cover this, we saw Oppenheimer this week. And I'm just going to go ahead and share this with you because I wrote my thoughts on my Facebook page, and it's a little extensive, so I thought you guys might want to let me share this with you. It's a powerful movie. Oppenheimer is. Let me check in here. Yeah. You guys let me know if you want me to, if you don't want me to go on about this, but I'm gonna tell you guys about this movie, my thoughts on it, because it's a 3-hour, it's a long movie. Oppenheimer is big. It's Christopher Nolan's newest movie. It's about Robert J. Oppenheimer and the father of the atomic bomb and the making of that atomic bomb and his life. And there's a lot in the movie, but it is not like any other movie you've ever seen. Let me just check in one more time, make sure I'm not going off the deep end here. All right, good. So, saw Oppenheimer. First off, it's a good movie. You should see it. Oppenheimer is not told in a linear fashion. Now, Pulp Fiction and Memento is told backwards. Pulp Fiction is told in different ways. They got nothing on this. This movie it's the most non-linear movie you'll ever see, jumping repeatedly from second to second, back and forth on a timeline that spans the working years of a man's entire lifetime. You go from young university age to old man, and lots of time in between, mostly focused around the Trinity explosion and the development of the bomb, but lots and lots of other stuff in other places of his life, and it's constantly bouncing back and forth. So 1 second, you're seeing images of him from university, next from Trinity, etc. Nolan, as a filmmaker, expects you to keep up. Be present for every second of the film and pay attention to the details. If you aren't willing to do that, this movie is definitely not for you. Now, I don't suppose to question Nolan's judgment so much as admit perhaps that there were parts I didn't fully grok or understand, and perhaps repeated viewings would clarify some bits, but that's a big ask for a 3-hour long movie of this nature. This is a movie that will definitely make you think a lot. The moral dilemmas surrounding the conception, creation, and use of the atomic bomb are explored without flinching, but the arguments are not fully developed, at least from my perspective. This movie gives one a real sense of the time period, the urgent but frustrated attitudes of the military and Manhattan Project personnel, the excitement of discovery, and the emotional impact of realizing that an act of scientific advance was immediately turned around to, of course, be used to obliterate hundreds of thousands of human beings. Now, all of that was done in an effort to forestall or prevent the death of millions more. Equations like this never feel right or good because the net result is death no matter how you solve it. Just that point alone, though, was never really fully explored, but only commented on in passing. There's a lot of posturing and glum-looking people talking around these things, but the moral bears are only poked and prodded rather than engaged with, and I think that was the point of the movie, but it left me ultimately unsatisfied. I did not see the Oppenheimer documentary, Xenu, just checking in back here. So I am curious to check that out, but I haven't seen it yet. This movie was based around a book called American Prometheus. Prometheus being the demigod who stole fire from the gods and gave it to man and therefore was tortured for eternity. That's the Prometheus figure, and Nolan makes a movie personifying, Oppenheimer as that. The movie is singularly focused around one man, Oppenheimer, yet I have to agree with other criticisms I've seen that after watching a 3-hour marathon about this man's life, I know almost nothing about him. I still don't understand his actual motivations. Being left with only one line, Oppenheimer's wife delivers near the end, which seems to try to summarize all of his post-World War II activities as an unsuccessful and even futile effort to expunge his guilt and not be blamed by the entire world for its ultimate unstoppable self-destruction. I mean, there are big ideas being bandied about in this movie. Fair enough, but as a person, what did he like? That's what I mean. I don't know anything about him as a person. What did he like? What made him smile? He doesn't do a lot of smiling in this movie. Did he ever pay attention to his kids? We see his kids. A couple times he's holding his kids, but there's no relationship there. There's nothing there. Did he and his wife ever have kind, loving moments? It didn't look like too many to me from what I was seeing. And if so, they aren't shown here ever. His relationships are portrayed as deep, dark, and very unsatisfying, leaving me to wonder why he was connecting with these women in the first place. Did Oppenheimer ever do anything for fun? Why did he enjoy New Mexico so much? I mean, we hear, but we're not shown, we're not told. It just leaves questions. None of these questions are even touched on. I've got no real idea now what this man was like to be around. If he truly acted all the time like he does in the movie, he would be the least interesting, least human person I've ever met. And I don't think that was what Nolan intended, so something was missed somewhere in the telling of this story. I wish I could be more specific, but when the emotional connection is missing, then stories like this feel more encyclopedic than real. Oppenheimer becomes more of an icon or symbol rather than a man, but this movie clearly intends to portray the human being, so it fails in some degree to do this. Just check back in with you guys here. I don't have any evidence that Jack Parsons ever knew or interacted with or met Oppenheimer. I have no knowledge of that connection at all. Oh, there we go. Prometheus was the Titan and Hercules was a demigod. Okay, my bad. I get my Greek mythology status hierarchy mixed up sometimes. Okay, now, the thing that does come through is the weight of responsibility. Oppenheimer felt for what he did. One can only imagine what the burden of that knowledge and guilt must feel like, and the enormity of that is present during every moment of this movie. You always know who you are looking at, what he did, and where this ends up going. Before seeing this, I didn't know anything about what the U.S. government did to Oppenheimer after the war ended, but it was all predictable and usual enough. Bureaucracies and weak, egotistical men, and I'm not talking about Oppenheimer, act in predictable ways, and that's all laid out in excessive detail throughout the film, demonstrated very capably by an array of very good actors. I do want to take a moment to comment on the incredible troupe Nolan brought together for this. This movie is full of top-flight actors bringing their A game. Florence Pugh was perhaps the one exception. Her performance is wooden and unsympathetic, and that was almost jarring to me in contrast to what the other performers were bringing. I'd say Matt Damon was the most invested in the supporting roles and definitely made me believe he was Leslie Groves, not just playing a part. Cillian Murphy broods incredibly well, and most of his performance is of a dark, glum nature, which he pulls off perfectly. I think more than anything, Oppenheimer very aptly shows how human beings are, in the end, cowardly and self-defeating creatures who can be counted on to tear down the most brilliant among us rather than face our own nature. That's some dark shit right there. We want what we want, and we act selfishly in the moment to get it, no matter who we have to destroy in the process or what damage we have to wring to achieve it. In the end, this is what destroys the better among us who naively don't see the machinations around them, don't assume the worst of others around them, and therefore always get caught in the crosshairs of fate. That's a harsh message and one that doesn't go down easily or comfortably. Since Nolan does lay this message on rather thick, it's impossible to miss, and I think where there is backlash to this film, that's where it comes from. There's no easy or pleasing way to get that across, but if there is one thing this film accomplishes, it is that. I believe this is a message a lot of people need to hear, but I don't know how many of them are willing to hear it. But Nolan tries anyway, and I have to acknowledge he does a better job than most, but ultimately it didn't emotionally connect with me, and that's why I'd only be able to give it a B+ rather than the A I think it shoots for. And there's my TED Talk for this evening. All right, guys. Let's see here. Anything else I need to address before we get going? All right. Thanks for coming around, guys. I really appreciate your viewership and your support and what you do for this channel and for and the content I'm producing here is something you want to see. And if you're catching this on replay, you know, excellent. I hope you will support the channel and the show, and I hope I will see you live on Fridays at 6 o'clock because that's when I do the show and have been for the last 2 years. So hopefully we won't be intersected with other things in the future. All right. So, yeah. Oh, thank you, Henny. Thank you very much for that. All right, guys. All that being said, you will see probably pre-recorded Q&A this weekend. I'm leaning in that direction. We'll see. If I go live, you'll find out tomorrow. I'll post a notice for it for Sunday, and it's just so much easier to go live for me. I love doing it, and it's a lot easier format for me than doing the pre-recorded. But the pre-recorded lets me just kind of go. So there's pros and cons both ways. I know you want to see the OT films. I totally get that. I wish I could show them to you. Oh my God, I wished I could. If you missed Oppenheimer's emotional life, Chris, what did you like about the movie? Oh gosh, maybe it's all just sort of understood for me, but Nolan is a technically capable perfectionist. He's very good at what he does, and the practical effects, the technical qualities of the film, the set design, the production design of the movie, the costuming, the sets, all the things that make the movie beyond just the actors. All of that is perfect, and I don't mean it just like it's kind of perfect. I mean it's perfect. You know it. You're looking at slices of history in certain moments, just pieces that were so well put together and so accurately put together that you might as well have been there. And that, I love that. I love that experience. I love that Nolan is that kind of a technical director and storyteller, and that he pays attention to every single little detail. He's very much like David Fincher that way. I appreciate both of those directors for that quality. They are amazing. They're thinking of details you're not gonna see. They're that into crafting art on every frame of their films. And we went and saw it in IMAX, by the way, which is how it was shot in IMAX film, and it deserves to be seen in IMAX film. It's a big screen movie. So if you do want to see it, I recommend you see it in the theater. Okay, so there we go. Yeah, exactly. It's a whole nother show, Linda, about the moral consequences of the Manhattan Project. Absolutely. All right, guys. So thanks for coming around, as always. And I think I've given you some idea of what's up for this weekend. Oh, my goodness. So I will do this solo tonight. Our critical thinking card for this evening. Just all these from recent weeks. Here we go. The just world hypothesis. Okay? Your bias. This is a cognitive bias called the just world hypothesis. Your preference for a just world makes you presume that it exists. Wow, this goes right along with my review. A world in which people don't always get what they deserve is an uncomfortable one that threatens our preferred narrative. A more just world requires understanding rather than blame. Try to remember that we're all fallible and that bad things happen to good people. All right, so there is our cognitive bias for the evening. Thanks, guys. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.